What do you want me to do? You just want me to hit you?
Come on, do me this one favor.
Why?
Why? I don't know why. I don't know. Never been in a fight. You?
No, but that's a good thing.
No, it is not. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight?
What's wrong? Get up!
I know this all day. Start asking the right fucking questions.
Come on, hit me before I lose my nerve.
God, this is crazy.
So go crazy. Let it rip.
Let it rip. What's up, everybody? It is another Sunday, another interview. I was out of town last week. I think it's been another week or two since we've done one of these. I am like always excited for doing interviews because, I mean, I think like most people, you don't get to see a ton of people in this new day and age. You just rarely get out there and meet as many people as you used to and have like long conversations as you used to before COVID and before, I mean, just in general, life has been more isolated. So doing these conversations is important. I just had fun with them. I like get to have conversations with people that generally you will have conversations with, but in passing or you know, meeting on the fly at a convention or something, you just never get these hour-long conversations if you don't do these kind of podcasts. Which, speaking of, the podcast idea is one thing I do want to like maybe expand to, because audio I think is enough for this stuff. So I'm stoked to maybe branch out into that. Our channel's doing really well. Man, I don't even know. The machines are paying attention now. So thank you, YouTube. But it's funny because like it almost was like a 0 to something slope, like a launch pad, like a vertical line, which is crazy to see. But I'm glad that the channel's doing well. More eyes, more talk about comics, more talk about art. And I think it mostly the stuff I want to do in the future is tutorials mixed with a lot of these interviews and kind of video essay-ish type of ideas that I want to bring on. But I've got a guest today. Let's get to talking. You guys may know him by like other names, but I knew him first as Publishin Pete Simeti. It was the first time I saw his name pop up. Because I was kind of late in the game of comics. I think he was becoming a publisher around the time I was just kind of getting comfortable with even reading comics. But either way, I've got Publishin Pete Simeti with me today. How you doing, Pete?
Hey, what's up, Joe? Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, it's been cool because we've gotten to talk a couple times in the past. Well, besides open mics, but I've been on your channel a couple times, which is nice.
Oh yeah, always great. Always great talking to you, man.
Yeah, same. I do. I really have a lot of respect for kind of just in general what you do, but I feel like with a lot of interview shows or just like promoting comic shows, there's not enough just creator talk. I don't like when we just talk the book because I think a lot of what you like about the book shines through with the creator if you talk to him enough. And publisher, and you're both of those things.
Yeah, I agree. I hate being on shows too where it's just let's look at the campaign and go through all the perks.
Yeah, I think
it's boring for me. I think it's boring for the viewer. It's one thing to work that in there and have that be like the 20% of the show or whatever it might be, but I think it's a lot more interesting to have people on and, you know, see what makes them tick.
Yeah, with the exception of like a launch or something, I think the goal is just talk to the creator and have some fun. It doesn't even need to be fun. It just needs to be not just scrolling through a website. Yeah. So with the show, I think with the premise, as you can tell from the intro, I'm trying to just talk about other things beyond comics? Like in general, my first question I have been asking is, have you ever been in a fight before? Is there something that, like an altercation that led to something physical? And your thoughts in general about fighting?
Well, I've been in many fights. Mostly when I was a kid, though. Up until the age of, I don't know, I think the last fight I got into was around 17, perhaps, of what I would consider a fight. Not just a couple shoves, but actually, you get someone's face on your fist.
Right. Knuckles hit other faces.
Yeah. But I mean, I grew up playing hockey too, so only been in one hockey fight. But those, it's the one hockey fight I was in. It would have been a better fight if the other dude agreed to take off his helmet too. Because when we were playing, we had like the face shield thing, the cage. You can't get into a fight with the cage. You're gonna break your hand. You're gonna cut it open everywhere. Well, Mm-hmm. So as a courtesy, as odd as that sounds, during a fight, you take off that helmet so you could fight, not kill each other in that way. Just beat each other up a little bit, get the emotion out. And the dude didn't want to take it off. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll wrestle you down then, and just kind of lunge at him and wrestle him down. Because it's like, I'm not going to throw punches, just get a couple punches in the side or something. But yeah. It's a fun way to start the show, actually. Yeah, I like this.
Yeah, I think it's because it's something so out of left field for most people. Just even if you really are, like, even if you do get in fights a lot, like, most people never ask you. And so, and to me, it's like one of those visceral things that I think we all pay attention to. You're like, oh, it's physical violence is like real because like anything that relates that closely to injury or death is in our subconscious all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Other than that, it was just fights as a kid from bullies thinking, they could beat me up or whatever. Usually spouting racial remarks at the same time or calling me four eyes or whatever it may be. And sometimes if they were a lot older, maybe they'd have the upper hand until I started really fighting back, which was around probably the age of 7, maybe is when I really started fighting back.
Okay.
And I specifically remember there was one fight when I was 8, and there were kids from middle school that were like 12, and 2 of them tried starting with me as I was walking home, and that really didn't go too well for them. Because I was just one of those fighters that, even as a kid, it was just, I'm just coming at you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like berserk style.
Yeah.
I'm not going to kind of wait and, whatever, and do that kind of a thing. It was more just like rushing them, and then you get the other one that's like, oh my God, that guy's nuts. And then, so even if they're in 2, the other guy's like, let's just go.
Yeah.
But I'd get in trouble a lot at school, though, because even though the bullies would pick on me or whatever and a fight would happen, they'd be in worse shape than me. So they wouldn't really believe that I was the one that was getting picked on, because they're like, look, you're in here like 4 or 5 times, and these kids always look worse than you. And I'm like, what can I say? Just let them beat the snot out of me, I guess, right? And then that would have been better.
I never thought about that. Yeah, because my second question, literally, what you brought up, like pretty much being picked on or that sort of relationship, and that's pretty interesting because if you think about it, you're right. If you like look better off than the other guy, they're gonna assume that you're the aggressor or like the bully because you're looking better off.
Like if the other kid's got a bloody nose, if they're like, holding themselves, they're crying. And, I remember one kid in particular, it was ridiculous at recess in middle school, and the kid was just going crazy on me. He thought that I was the kid that hit him. And for some reason, I don't know what it was, right? But he comes at me thinking I'm the kid that started with him. And he like jumps me from behind. He just punches the back of my head.
Sucker
and
punch.
I was like, what the hell? And he's all like telling me off, and I'm like just going right at him. And then when they find me, the recess monitors are like getting me off at the top of him. I kind of went like full Ralphie from Christmas Story, just kind of like beating him, and he's got the bloody nose. He's got like a cut across like his chin and his neck, and I'm just I got a punch in the back of my head and whatnot, but that was kind of it. And so he's in the office with me, and we're sitting there, and I'm just like kind of pissed and just like, quiet. And then he's like, like all over the place.
Yeah, balling up. Yeah, dude, it's interesting. Like, so you, I don't know how big you are, but generally smaller kids. I was really small, so I got picked on a lot. Did you have a bully or two, or you?
Yeah, I had a couple persistent ones. I had one that lived like 3 houses from me. He lived around the block. And then I had a couple other kids that were down the block that weren't necessarily like physically violent, more just like taunting and words and that kind of stuff. But the one that was around the block for about 3 or 4 years, when I was 6 to 9 or so, he was around, and that kid was crazy. His whole family was so off. I hope, and that's the weird thing. When you're an adult, you look back and you're like, these are kids, And I hope that he's not living a life where he's behind bars or something, because the family that he came from, if he didn't get out of that situation and didn't correct his life, man, I don't see any other path for him or his siblings. But that was the thing, is looking back, I'm just like, we were all kids, and hopefully these people are different. They're most likely different at this point, and I don't hold on to anything like that at that age.
For sure. It's like a growing pains type of thing. Something you go through as a kid, because I think a lot of the responses, the one similar thing I've been getting is it is something that's juvenile. You know what I mean? So, but before we move forward, let's talk to chat just for a second. Generally, we don't do a ton of chat talk, but I do want to see who's here. Levy, I've seen you a ton over on Alterna's channel, Pete's channel.
What's up?
And you're great. Great for coming by over here onto my channel. If you guys hit that like button, it will help spread the stream a little bit. That'll help. Zaid Comics is here. What's up?
Hey, what's up?
Diaz Bros. And Jeremy, what's up, man? Again.
Hey, Jeremy. How's it going?
Every time I see you, congratulations on your channel doing so well. So yeah, it's great to ask you odd questions that I exclusively get the answers to. So I feel like when I do these interviews, I get like a crazy person. I feel like, or at least it looks that way, because I like to plan my interviews out ahead of time, and that way I can make little notes, and I just leave them around like I'm an investigator, and I just have so guys that are going to be interviewed 2 weeks from now, I've got notes hanging around. All they say is just eyebrows or something, question mark, and you're like, okay, now I got to figure out what that means the day of. So I did a little bit of that today. I wrote up what. So with that being said, I wanted to ask a few Pete history questions before we move on to maybe other type of just in general questions, because I know we started with my fight question, but in general, I know you longtime fan of comics, but what do you think is, because for me, I feel like I jumped in late, and comics are kind of like a niche type of thing. What would you think, as a weird question, what do you think is the main detractor from normies picking up a comic, as a kid? Or what do you think is the detractor from all that? If you had any, maybe you don't have an analysis of it, but what do you think?
Well, it's strange you talk about them as niche, because it seems like they got more and more and more niche. But the comics themselves. But what's strange about it is that the characters have gotten more and more mainstream.
Right.
It's a paradox. And when comics were everywhere, they were rightly so, because they told all kinds of stories. It wasn't just relegated to largely being about superheroes. Which I think is more fantasy driven, and you're more likely as a kid, I think, to be drawn to that. And then you're constantly bombarded by society, your parents, whatever it might be, telling you got to grow up. That's fantasy stuff. That's kids. You got to take things more seriously. You got to get out of that kind of mindset. And I think if there were more comics along the way, even by those kinds of publishers that were putting out superheroes, if they were more likely to then cater to an audience with that different, more mature subject matter, and not having more mature superhero stories necessarily, but having more mature, horror, westerns, action, crime, etc., not superhero universe continuity, just completely just telling stories the way you would have movies that are their horror movies, their action, their sci-fi. You know, if it was more predicated towards that, I think people would have stuck with comics a lot more.
Yeah, more variety. You have just more times to hit, more chances.
I think that's
on the
also a
dice.
big reason why manga is so successful too, is because there's such a variety of it. That's why it's so funny nowadays to see the constant push about diversity and things like that, which is diversity just another word for variety. But it's just diversity and variety isn't just slap on a different costume or worse, treat someone's race, gender, or sexuality as a costume. You know, and just say that's you know, it's diverse now. Don't you like it? If you're that kind of person who looks like this person superficially or whatever other superficial trait, that means you want to read this, right? I don't think most people really work that way. I think we're seeing a lot of people that work that way, but most people don't work that way. It's still a small amount of people that are kind of in that mindset. So I think if comics had broadened out a bit, they're certainly they were very broad. There was a lot of diversity and variety. And then when the Comics Code Authority kind of came along, it really, which they opted to do, they didn't need to. But, you know, they killed a lot of the different varieties of comics, romance, horror, Western, etc., slowly started to die off, and the superhero became so prevalent. But, you know, now I think we're seeing the past 20 or so years where it's really becoming mainstream within comics, but not mainstream within outside of that, but mainstream within the industry itself to have all these genres and have it actually truly be more diverse and have more variety. I think it's honestly all a big marketing ploy by the bigger companies, knowing that they're not going to go down the avenue of telling a wide variety of non-universal type stories within their universes, their superhero universes. So they're kind of trying to make it as if like they are the entirety of comics. Because if people start looking outside of that, right, well, that means that they're not a customer.
Right.
They're going to someone else as a customer. So
it's intentional, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a ton of comics out there, and anyone that actually is interested in any kind of genre is going to find whatever they want within comics.
Right. I don't know the first time I mean, because I started late into comics around 2006, 2007. It kind of like I had a few as a kid, but didn't have the opportunity to, and so I think I jump started myself around that time. And I remember seeing interviews of like, because when you first jump in, all you see is superhero stuff for the most part, because you're just so overwhelmed anyway. There probably is other genres. You just like, they're few and far between, and you know the glamour and all the recommendations are like these big mainstream characters.
And even when you see non-superhero books, you're almost thinking, like when you're not used to it yet, you're almost thinking like, who's a superhero in this? What are their powers? You know, you're waiting to see, like, is there some kind of superhero element to this? Even though there's a lot of comics nowadays, especially independent ones, that don't mention anything really along those lines. But I can see if people start off, and I've had these conversations with a lot of people when they were starting off, because comics are so synonymous with superhero. You know, thinking that like, oh, well, you know, I don't really like superheroes, so I'm not going to get into comics. And you have to be like, no, there's all kinds of comics.
Yeah, you don't get it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I have that similar, I had like a similar experience where like someone told me that, or no, it was an interview. I think maybe Paul Pope or somebody was doing like an interview and was just like, there's a ton of genres out there, and I think we need more of that. And he's pushing obviously the indie side of things and trying to push, you know, these genres becoming, you know, just more readily available and encouraging people to, you know, break out of just this kind of superhero trope that everybody likes to fall into, or we kind of like funneled into. But so when you started Alterna, at least the internet says it's 2006, is when you started Alterna. How old were you then?
22 at that point in time. It was 2006.
That's like that's pretty entrepreneurial of yourself at 22. Most 22-year-olds are much more concerned with just buying the books at all, or maybe drawing a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I was right out of college. Well, I ever since I was a kid, I'd probably say around the age of maybe 7 or 8, I really was like, I want to make comics. I want to be in this world. I want to do this with my life. and I didn't know what the hell that meant.
Right.
I just knew that, I was reading Wizard, I was seeing all the comics that were made, the toys, the cards, whatever. And it just seemed like the greatest thing on earth. Like, that was amazing to me. The only other thing I could have done with my life, maybe, that I would have pursued it as a passion, would have happened later on, and that would have been to maybe play hockey or something like that. But I got into that too late. You really got to be like born in skates to have a shot at doing that. And I didn't start picking up playing hockey till I was like maybe 10. But the comics and everything, I was always drawing. I was always making up my own characters that would go with the characters that already existed. So I was already doing that kind of a thing.
Yeah, that next jump though is a big one. I feel like the entrepreneurial spirit of America is there. It's just I feel like the boomers like ruined it for us or something. I don't know, like they sat on their laurels or something. I don't know where did it stop?
I like to be more specific than that. Okay. Because I don't like broad generalities painted on me, and I don't like doing that to others. Sure. But I would definitely say that there's a generation of those within positions of power, whether it was government or corporations or what have you, that definitely started to go, yeah, if they keep being more independent and this keeps getting more decentralized, we're going to lose our wealth and our power. So we have to find a way to kind of curb that. Because if anything, entrepreneurialism and the middle class it's a roughly new concept in terms of human history. You usually had like the working class, which is like the working poor, and then the elite, those in power. It's a relatively American concept. It's a relatively 20th century concept, very late 19th century, maybe. You could split hairs about it. But because of that, you see the advent of all these people being able to do what they want to do, put their ideas out there and compete and create and have it be this fueled feedback loop. And you saw tremendous amounts of innovation as a result of that on top of various other things. So the middle class, the entrepreneur, the small business really spurned a lot and eventually would grow and create bigger business and corporations and that kind of a thing. But you still need that happening. You still need people going out there and creating and competing and putting new ideas out and, having the public basically, as close to a free market system as you could get. And once you start having people at the top not understand that that's needed, don't be threatened by it. It's needed to have things like that. But once you have people that kind of become more, feeling like they need to have control on it, they're threatened, you'll have different things come into play where that's not an opportunity anymore for a lot of people. And it becomes harder and harder and harder to retain that. You
saw it as a top-down authoritarian type of manipulation of the system, of the market.
Yeah, because everything on the other level comes from the ground up. So people are constantly in a position like necessity is the mother of invention. If I had to say who the dad is, I would say it's a little bit of luck and stupidity. Yeah. Because there's a lot of amazing things that are created because you kind of goofed on what you were trying to do. And you're like, oh, that really works better. So, you didn't really necessarily, you knew you had to do something, but at the same time, it took a little bit of that dumb luck to make it work and to actually have it be successful. So all of that comes from the ground up. It's just people basically, tinkering away or trying to solve a solution, problem and come up with a solution for it. And if they find it works for them, maybe it'll work for others. And maybe they could sell this if it's good enough and so on. And then all of a sudden a business is born. Right. But if you take that away and everything is like, no. Us at the top, we give you the answers and the solutions. You at the bottom, you just purchase what we tell you to and you think what we tell you to.
Yeah. That whole meme, pretty much the consume, keep consuming kind of type of meme.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily capitalism. That's corruption. Right. People confuse the two.
It's true. I don't. Yeah, I'm definitely fully capitalist. I lean more freer markets than restrictions. I do think there's. Man, I'm so close to being an anarchist, but I think we need to restrict some things.
Nowadays, it's tougher and tougher to get away from that mindset because you're like, man, every single thing I look at, it's like you guys just make it worse.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I don't like it's blatant with the internet. You can see it like as clear as you see like your neighbor not mowing their lawn. It's like okay, I can see the difference between people, even on the internet like this. But do you have like I feel like for me, I think I say this before. I might have said this to you. I think the one thing that like the complaints that the SJWs have right about like representation in like media is that there is, I would be lying to say that there is a psychological thing that happens. Like humans see patterns. So we do see the pattern of like, oh, like I see myself in this character, and sometimes seeing somebody that looks like you will trick your brain into thinking that's actually a thing. So when you're looking at business type of inspirations, do you have somebody to look to? Did you see like your uncle create a business or something that helped you out?
I mean, I guess it was never like a direct inspiration. I guess I was around a lot of inspirations that subconsciously hit me. Like my grandfather, or both of my grandfathers were kind of entrepreneurial. My Chinese grandfather had his own convenience store in Trinidad because that's where they moved first. And he started up like one of the first kind of things down there that people would say is kind of more like a bodega kind of a thing. But he started, they were cooking like Chinese food while also selling all kinds of different groceries at it. And it was a very popular place because of it. Eventually they had to go because there were so many Black Power riots taking place in Trinidad that they left, and they fled China because of the communism. But they were burning down various different kinds of movements there that were happening in the late 60s to 70s were burning down different kinds of businesses. So they eventually had left, and then they came up to New York. And then my Italian grandfather, he was a skilled craftsman, and he could just carve amazing furniture and cabinets and all kinds of unbelievable stuff. Yeah,
my grandfather did the same. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's what basically enabled him to come over. And him and his second oldest son, they started up a little business for about a year or so, raised enough money, and then brought pretty much everybody else over from Sicily. So that's kind of like the convergence of my two families that made me. But I would always hear about stuff like that and see it and be around it and just the conversations. And then when it came to comics, I was really inspired by a lot of the different people within comics. I mean, I'd be lying if I said Stan Lee wasn't an inspiration. He obviously is. And then seeing the guys that created Image and reading about that, and Wizard was a big inspiration too, because it just felt like, wow, so you got Marvel and DC, and there was a couple others I knew at the time, like Dark Horse and Kitchen Sink. But to see the Image guys come along and read about, some of these guys who I really love their work. One of my first comics was an Incredible Hulk that McFarlane had drawn. So I was more familiar with a lot of their stuff because I had grown up with so much of it. It was just around all the time. And I thought that was pretty cool too, that they were going out there and creating that. And so comics really just seemed like a very viable business. I mean, this was probably around 91 to 93. And then by the time 95, 96 comes along, I noticed even as a reader that comics were on the decline. Like, they just didn't look as good as they used to. The stories were a mess. And then Marvel goes bankrupt. And I felt like, wow, at like 11, 12 years old, my whole world's crashing down. I'm not going to work in comics. Are they going to still make comics,
Yeah.
They came in and out of my life so fast. And I started getting into other things. I still wanted to get into art and graphic design and package design. And maybe Wizard was still around. And I thought maybe, I could do something in comics. Maybe I'll work on a magazine or something, but not work for a publisher. Mm-hmm. So I just kept going in that direction. I got more into music, more into sports, more into girls and all that other stuff. And then by the time I was a high schooler, I got into art a lot again, and then really put the pedal to the metal, and then pursued, going to art school and stuff like that. And then that's where Alterna kind of was birthed out of that, because it was like my last year in college. I was like, I want to start my own thing, whatever that may be, you know, and kind of build up my chops a bit. I knew I wasn't good enough to just go out there and go apply to whoever, because at that point it seemed like, okay, the industry was a little more stable. Marvel, DC were around still. Okay, I could still maybe do this, and but I knew I still needed to do a lot of work, and I didn't go to a college at that point in time for comics or something. I didn't go to the Crypid school or whatever. I just went mostly for graphic design, and I did some business courses, and I took a bunch of like illustration classes and things like that. But so I get into that aspect of it, creating my own thing, and just thought that I was going to be around for maybe 2 or 3 years. I'll learn as much as I can, and maybe I'll sell some of the books I make on my own, and then that'll be it. And 17 years later, here we are.
Wow. Yeah, so I feel like just having the idea or the motivation to put you far above the majority of people, or just even beyond that, just having some sort of goal at whatever you said, 6 or 7, that you want to work in comics, that's for, like, most people don't have that. And
it's always very driven.
Well, I mean, you have to be to do what you're doing, but it's odd because we're also not really taught, either by direct teaching or by example, that this is like something you should do, seeking out actually what you like to do and aiming, like doing a very good aiming thing before high school. I don't know. I guess I don't want to force people into certain things, but there's actually a good article. I think it's just How to Do What You Love or something by, man, I'm blanking on his name. Paul. No, I'm not going to even try, but it's a great article, and I wish I read it, and I give it to people that I know now that are trying to struggle to find like what they want to do. But it's interesting that you had it. You had it in mind and had enough cojones to like not be, most people don't do things not because of like the failure part of it. It's more like how people judge you because of the failure, or just judgment in general. So like it takes balls to just like, oh, let me give this a shot, you know, like to start whatever you want to call it. Did you aim, was it a publishing company from the start
No, it was just like a name for my stuff that I was putting out. It was just a self-publishing label. And instead of, I've used this example before, but instead of naming it like Simeti Studios or something, you know, I named it Alterna because I wanted it to be an alternative. Here was something else that you could have, you know, but I didn't want to name it alternative because number one, that existed, and then number two, it was too on the nose. So Alterna sounded cool. And literally, I gave it as much thought as that because I didn't think it was going to be around for that long. And then when I started doing it and getting my own stuff out there, which was really bad, like most first things are, I was used to drawing big in college, like wall mural size, charcoal drawings and painting, and, you know, and then like small was like 24 by 36 to me. So to get into like the 11 by 17 even was like, that was kind of tough, you know, and being so much more comfortable with charcoal and paint and this and that, it was difficult. I probably should have just went and tried to do that for my first comic, but I went and tried to do it very traditionally with paint, and pencil and ink and that kind of a thing. And it was tough. It was tough to get into that aspect of it. And then I got the stupid idea up my butt to be like, you know, maybe I'll have like a lot of splash pages because people like splash pages, you know, and then have a lot of the lettering be more artistic, you know, which meant like this whole book was crap and really busy between everything.
Yeah.
So that was me at like 20 or so, trying to create something by 21, getting it created. And then eventually just for my next thing, it taught me a lot of what I liked and what I didn't like doing with comics. And I did a lot of free work for other people at that point in time too, just trying to learn.
Yeah,
just
that's a big thing.
Yeah. I didn't work for exposure because I didn't want anyone seeing this anyway. I worked for experience. So I worked to just get in on something and have someone direct me on what looked good to them, what didn't, what I needed to fix, you know, and I was just doing that for like 2 years. And inking, lettering, drawing, you know, making a couple covers, that kind of a thing, all over the place. And I learned a lot too at that point. And then on my next book, I figured, you know what, I'm going to let someone else take care of the sequential pages. I'm going to write, I'm going to letter, and I'm going to still be a little artsy with it, but I'm going to stick to the basics of lettering. and not try to reinvent the wheel here. And that was more successful, and that was the chair. And then that eventually I revised much later on too, and did more closer, I guess, to complete traditional lettering in terms of the way lettering generally looks. But it was kind of like an ever-evolving along the way. It was really strange because putting stuff out at Alterna under my own label, I started getting people that were sending me emails and submissions. And after like I think 6 or 8 months, I decided to start taking them on. At first, I didn't feel comfortable at all because I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get stuff out here and put a label on it and see what happens. And maybe in 3 years, I'll go somewhere else. But that didn't really ever happen. I never went and worked for another company. I talked to a lot of professionals when I went to show them my work at conventions or just have conversations with them. And so many professionals would be giving me these like, you ever see Billy Madison?
Yeah, of course.
All right. Okay. So that whole scene when the kid's like, I can't wait to go to high school. And he's like, don't you say that. Don't ever say that. Right. Stay here. Right. And there was a lot of like stories like that from pros that were basically like, you're an indie guy. You haven't done this yet. Stay as an indie guy and keep getting your stuff out there. It might take longer. It might be harder work. Stay the course. And I was like, okay, I will. There's a lot of people I respected. Chuck Dixon was actually one of them that was
Really?
like, he wasn't as, giving me the horror story side of it, but he was doing the whole kind of, keep creating your stuff. You don't need the bigger guys. You could get your stuff out there. Keep creating. I was like, okay, I respected Chuck Dixon's work and everything. I was like, that's interesting. So I kept staying down that path, and then Alterna kept taking on. We took more and more people on, and we eventually got distribution, and then we started putting out graphic novels. Then in 2017, we put out the single issue newsprint line, and everything's been different since that point in time. But it's interesting to see the evolution of it. But I never worked for another publisher or anything like that. I worked with a lot of other people who helped me out and let me even work for them for free, which was, I think, detrimental possibly to their work at the time because I was so new to it. Yeah. But I never got the idea that I should work and expect something out of it more than I had agreed to get out of it. And at that point in time, I just wanted to learn. I figured I'm going to either learn by doing it myself, which means I teach myself, which means no one's going to critique me and help me out. Or I can, do this for someone else and put the time in it. I had other jobs at the time too, and I could put that time into it. And I could learn and then hopefully get better at it. And then if it came time to justify a payment from someone, a prospective client, employer, whatever in the future, I'd know what the hell I was doing.
Feel better about it, yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I always looked at it.
It's really interesting to hear that kind of backstory because, I mean, you're one of the few. I don't like there's others, obviously, but it's a totally different world. Somebody that starts a publishing company today is got way different like obstacles. Not way different. There's a few easier ones and a few that are like harder. Like handling social media is totally different and using that to your advantage. But in general, I feel like, the slogan that really changed my life has always been responsibility is taken, not given. So if you ever have like a thing where you want to get to, say, whatever publishing or whatever you're trying to do, you can always ask to take on more responsibility. Most people are cool with that. The compensation thing, like you're saying, is the next level. And but most people will give you the time of the day to just take on a responsibility, make their load a little bit easier, And that's usually the places where the reason why I started doing tutorials was because I asked, and I asked to do it for free, and I just ended up getting paid eventually. The same thing with a lot of other just odd jobs in art. That's just how it went. I was just like, I want to help you out. And most people are waiting for this like grand moment where they're going to be approached to you like and be like, do you want to like help me out with this most people are not going to do that. And before moving on real quick, did get a few other people in here. Genuine Comics showed up, and Eric Weathers, our last guest, is here as well. Eric, thanks for joining us last week or 2 weeks ago. But either way, it was cool to have you on, and thanks for showing up again. And look at this question. Why can I see Pete's eyes?
It's
Why is
because
that,
it's
Pete?
during the day, so these are the glasses I normally wear. I still need some kind of a gradient on them from the computer screen and whatnot that I'm in front of all the time. Um, Sometimes I'll wear these too. They've got like, really get into the hole.
Yeah.
But look at how thick these puppies are, right? I'm blind without these things.
Wow.
But at night, when it's just like the light, then it's the screen, and it's a different setting. I really need the sunglasses on, which is ironic. I need to wear the sunglasses at night as opposed to in the day.
That's interesting. My eyes totally. I had LASIK surgery, and my eyes totally changed afterward. I feel like I'm like super sensitive to dark. I have light eyes
That's what
anyway.
I've heard.
So
Yeah.
yeah, like I think it's just that you can see more in the shadows. Like just like in a painting. Like if you do a good painting and you focus on the shadows, you can see a lot of the detail. That's kind of how it is with LASIK. Like you can see so much more, so you just pay attention to. You're like, oh man, I really can't see anything. That's how maybe there's some science that is totally contradicting that, but that's how I think about it. I think we went through a couple different things that have been answered because I wrote down a couple of these type of things that you already went through. One of the bigger, grander questions we'll say is why do art at all? It kind of comes up when I think about AR in like AI art in general. Now I think about like why are you making art if you're putting in prompts? What are you getting out of it if you're just thinking up ideas and typing them into a text box and then you get something spit out for you? It kind of, to me, harkens back to this question of why do art at all? So, Pete, why do we do art at all?
I think we're constantly trying to make sense of the world. For me, I don't know why necessarily. I find it easier to explain maybe why human beings do this as opposed to why I myself am doing this. Like in a specific sense, why am I drawn to doing that? Why am I wanting to do that? But I think we're always trying to make sense of things around us and trying to find almost like running our own simulation. We're trying to handle these complex situations every day that come at us and make us feel a certain way and make sense of it. And a lot of the times they don't make much sense at all. And I think it's almost cathartic for us to go, okay, well, in this realm, I can make sense of it however I want. I have some feeling of control. Whereas in the real world, you don't really have too much control over a lot of other things outside of what you're doing. And then even then, you got to count on other people to cooperate and not just try to crush you like a bug. In order for you to make any kind of sense of the world around you and exist in it.
Right.
But for art, I always found myself just drawn to the visual dynamics of it, to the color, to the look of it, the line work, the idea that it is something that doesn't exist regularly. You don't really just find it. I appreciate realistic art, but at the same time, I'm not really drawn to it,
Right.
I'm drawn
like
to
the
stuff
Renaissance
that's
style masters.
yeah, like that stuff. It's like, wow, I appreciate the skill and I respect it and it's amazing. But I'm not gonna necessarily say, okay, I want to see that all the time because I almost feel like even though it's heightened, it's not exactly heightened in the way that I'm drawn to it. The aesthetics of it, and that's just me personally. I don't think that's obviously that doesn't apply to everybody. But
Are you a fan of Scott McCloud, by the way? In his cause I know I think his books are in like college classes now. And I think, what is it? The first one he made, Understanding Comics, I think was really good to break down what a comic is. But
I like parts of that, but I find that overall it almost boils it down too much to the point that it seems like people can, and this is the problem I have with all kinds of like how to do books on making art, is because it almost starts boiling it down too much to a point where I feel like if you don't step away from it at a certain point, you start aiming too much to replicate exactly what that book is telling you to do instead of pursue your own vision. You start losing your artistic vision within the manual. and then there's a sameness across the board that comes with it. It really happens in writing, like how to write kind of things, instead of just learning structure and just basics or whatever. When people start really sticking to the whole formatting of it, and they don't sway outside of it, they don't just take it as here's a good foundation and then you should build upon that. A lot of people start going like, no, that's the end all be all. And then all of a sudden you look around and enough people do it and you're like, everything is the same. You know,
and it happened organically because like the writers that wrote those books of how to, because they've done it so long, they're just seeing these patterns of like, oh, every time we get to the climax, it's exactly on page 120, you know, and this is what you need to do, you know, like, and I believe you're right on that. Like it becomes too much of a science, and there's a balance there. I bring up Scott's book mostly because of the his explanation of why we accept cartoons as representations of us. I think he does that breakdown really well. It's just like I think it's the best explanation is that like because of a cartoon is so generic in a lot of ways, it's not realistic. We can relate to it more. We see ourselves in the blank cartoon face way easier than we see whatever another really realistic face, because we can obviously tell it's not us, you know.
It's easier to imprint yourself upon that.
Right.
It's the same thing why a lot of children's books have animals and anthropomorphic kind of nature to it, because if you have more of a specificity of a human being in a situation, some people might go, oh, that doesn't really look like me, I can't really relate, you know. And it is a human trait to almost have that kind of inclination towards the superficial. And I think we see way too much of it nowadays, though. And that's a problem, obviously, not just within culture and storytelling and media, but I think it's a problem among communities and among even families and people who are parents that are raising kids that are not necessarily telling them to look outward and inward, but are telling them to look at the surface. And that's just strange. We see so much predicated on the surface, on the superficial, on the stuff that just barely touches upon who you are, not what you are or what you're inclined to do. Like if you have a hobby, does that necessarily mean that that's the entirety of who you are? You know, what's between your legs, is that who you are? You know, hell, even what's between your ears, that ain't necessarily all of who you are. There's all kinds of other things that come into play. You know, Human beings are way more complex than what we want to just confront and deal with. And that should be fine. We should be like, yeah, of course, you know, people like a lot of different things. People are walking contradictions. You know you got to be healthy, but you're going to eat some junk food today. You know you should get better sleep, but you got a lot to do, so you're going to cut into your sleep. You know, there's all kinds of different things we do all the time where we're constantly prioritizing and creating a hierarchy every second of every day. And sometimes, you know, we know better, but we still do the other thing because we think that this other thing is more important than that other thing right now, and then that's it. Put into enough situations, and depending what your emotions are or what situation you are in life, and all of a sudden you could be making a lot of bad decisions against your better judgment. So people are way more complex than just what we look like or what we feel like in a moment, or who we want to sleep with, or you know, anything like that. That's so to see fictional character representations boil down to that and say it's a representative, because that's the part that's bad. Once you start saying it's representative, that's completely wrong. You can have whatever character you want to have, but once you start saying that this represents people, that's strange, you know. And
why is
and,
that?
Yeah, why do we feel that way, or why do you think people do that?
I will also, why is it strange to you in particular as well? Just to, but drill into that a little bit. I feel like.
So, can you be specific a little bit?
Yeah.
further?
So I guess if you're, I'd say if you're seeing representation as a bad thing or a strange thing, what do you mean by that?
Oh, okay. So I think representation is kind of an organic, natural thing. If the world is comprised of what it's comprised of, and you're trying to tell a certain story that represents that world, not represents a person, but represents that world, then obviously you should include the things that would be representative of that world. But if you're trying to, for instance, this is where the representation argument for me superficially ends. A lot of stories, fiction, have nothing to do with the world we live in. They're not representative of the planet Earth. They're not representative of your neighborhood. They're not representative of human beings. So now where does your representation come in? Now your representation has to be below the surface. Your representation has to deal with who these individuals are. Why are they doing what they're doing? What situation are they in? And then you find yourself now relating to who they are and why they're doing it. As opposed to like, oh, well, this individual looks like me, so simply enough, that means that they are me, or I am them. And that's just wrong. If anything, that's the foundation for every kind of racism, prejudice, bigotry you could possibly think of, because you're thinking that this person who looks like you is like you. You're thinking that this person who looks this way would be this way, that their personality would follow suit, that their thinking would follow suit, that they would be more inclined to be this sort of way. And then if they're not, all of a sudden there's a moral referendum on them and then they're bad. Now you've imposed a morality upon it. It's like people that impose morality upon the term normal. There's no morality on that term. Normal is just like a mathematical average. It's just a statistical thing.
Just the mean, yeah.
It doesn't mean you're good or bad. You could be normal and be horrible. You could be normal and be great. You could be abnormal and be the greatest person who's ever lived. If anything, some would argue that that is abnormal.
Yeah.
So, it's that kind of thing where along the lines, because we've had so much of the words being twisted and being given context to them before the context is actually supplied in purpose and in terms of what's actually occurring. That when the context is given and supposed upon a certain word, now all of a sudden it's a loaded term and you get all these people in certain heated positions.
Yeah,
and it doesn't need to be that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what are you coming from? Like the way you see representation, or the way you see stories. If you're looking for representation, or if you're looking for identity, you're going to find it because you can read into whatever.
Yeah, and again, I find it trickles back to if someone is looking at media and is saying, "I feel like I'm seen. I feel like this person who looks like me is on the screen, in the page, whatever it may be," and that makes me validated. I look at that and I go, man, that means that you must have a very poor relationship with your family, with the community around you, with friends, with relatives, with teachers, with everybody that you come across in real life, because you're feeling validated and understood only through a fictional representation that someone is being told superficially, this person is like a stand-in, an avatar for you, and
that's a good point. Because the way I see it is like that's a reflection of, like you said, the mental state of society in general for America. It's like
exactly, and it's and having it being pushed that way is really sad because it shows that there has become a breakdown where people are going, man, like I don't find escape. Where a lot of this entertainment usually you find escape within it, and the escape doesn't distract you necessarily from life. It can, and a lot of times it does, but it often helps you deal with life. It often helps you make sense of the things that are happening in life in a metaphorical way. If everything becomes a literal interpretation, all of a sudden you're looking at it, and how many literal examples can you provide? If then you're not providing a literal example to specific situations, there's no more metaphor. Now, how the hell does anyone handle anything and figure out anything about the world around them or get value out of the storytelling being put before them? It basically is just like an instruction manual. You might as well just read nonfiction at that point. Yeah. There's no point then in creating something that's outside yourself and outside your known reality. So that's why it's strange to me when people go through that and see that, because there's a ton of nonfiction representation. If people want to dig through history for people who look like them or came from their region or whatever it is, learn more about their family, learn more about their community. There's just so many real people who've been around.
To go make some fake representation.
Yeah.
Bancroft brings it up here. Hey, Mr. Bancroft. Characters should represent a person, not be an avatar for a demographic. I think that's what our main complaint is from our side of, I guess, the perspective of this type of representation and in general, does it forced diversity, forced identity, politics, this type of media is not meant to be funneled and like cornered in this way. Like you said, like there's like a lot of things that you can make out there, and it doesn't have to fit this thing where you need to see yourself or not see yourself.
It's very
in
Big
IP.
Brother kind of stuff when you boil it down, because it's trying to tell, because this is a large corporation doing these things. It's not necessarily one individual creating something.
Right.
These are large corporations with a lot of ties into governments and global elite power structures. And then they are sending out the narrative and then telling you that this represents you. And we did this to provide you with some sense of belonging and validation. That is frightening for people to fall into that and go, yes, I feel more inclined to believe this nameless, faceless, soulless, gigantic entity that has its tentacles within everything, than they are to believe even those that they live in the same house with, or that they're in the same community with, or they're friends with, or whatever it may be. Now, if you like a character and you notice their personality traits as you read their stories, let's say that you visually when I was a kid, I was drawn to Spider-Man. You know, if I read Spider-Man and I was like, I don't like this character at all. You know, like this is a bad guy. You know, I don't like him. I might like the way he looks. And there's plenty of characters I love the way they look. But I would never say, you know, oh, yeah, I would aspire to, or I admire anything that they're doing. You know, you would know the difference. And hopefully it's because you were taught or you experienced certain things or whatever it may be. But, you know, if I read Spider-Man and his personality didn't speak to me at all, he could have still been a good guy. But his personality is just like, don't care for it. Then I don't care for the character. I can't connect, you know. But so it's that level of it, and it's just, think about it. How many people have you known in your life, you know, and then you've met them, had conversations, whatever, and then how many would you consider friends? And then of those friends, how many would you consider close friends? And then of those people you've known in your life, how many would you say I will spend my life with them? You know,
it narrows down, to.
Yeah. So we all have this hierarchy within what we do in life in terms of the characters we meet. But it's because of the fact that, yeah, sure, how many dates do you go on? How many people do you meet? You might be physically attracted, but then you get to know them and you're like, wow, we're not going to mix. Like, this is a bad situation.
Yeah. I think you brought up the whole human being as like a complex thing. And we're so complex, we don't understand ourselves. And I mean, we don't have to get into free will talk now, but to me, I think the free will thing is an illusion. And we kind of are more malleable than people think. And I'll get into this in a second. But Dave says, I don't trust people who can only relate to people or characters who look like them. Yeah, that thought is very much, I don't want to say it's bad. Like, you're putting like a moral thing where you shouldn't trust them. I just think people in general are sponges. And so if you're constantly being told by these companies or by media, your favorite characters or whatever, that like this is the way to look for, the media is constantly telling you that like racism is a thing still and like all this stuff matters, and you don't have any type of core something that's keeping you all those ideas I need to stop listening to all the time. If you don't have that awareness, then you're going to just inadvertently believe these things. Like, to me, beliefs are just thoughts that you just hear all the time. And if you're hearing this thought of like whatever you look like on the outside is what you are, then you probably will start believing it over time. Without even knowing about it. Yeah.
And you talked about it early on in terms of conversations and in terms of the world becoming kind of more insular and isolated in some respects. And if people aren't seeking to kind of expand their perspectives and listen to other people and take in various experiences from other people as well, and they're constantly being told instead from some higher authority or whatever it may be that this is the way things are, and they're not experiencing them for themselves. Now, all of a sudden, your whole worldview is very narrow, and you go into it thinking like, well, why should I look past that? You know, I mean, there's nothing past that. If you're told that, you know, you go to the edge of the earth and you fall off kind of a thing over and over again, you're not going to go to past that point. They told you not to. Why would you question it?
Learned helplessness. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. We've like human beings, we've always been in positions of we emulate, and that's how we survive. That's how we've learned to survive, is through emulation of those who are surviving. So if we're seeing that this is a thing to do, and we're being almost like programmed or reconditioned in a subtle way 100,000 times over the course of whatever years you're in, if you're a developed individual and you already think past this point and you already have perspective and wisdom, you're very much inclined to think the way you want to think, as opposed to the other person who's still developing, or maybe they could be older. They don't need to be a child, but they could just have not gone through experiences in life, and instead are exposing themselves to experiences vicariously from what others are telling them, and never actually experiencing much of it themselves. Or even worse, it becomes like we talked about earlier on with the fighting and the bullies and things like that, how as an adult I look back and I'm like, everyone, we were just kids, and I hope that these kids who are now hopefully adults are nice, normal, happy, friendly people, and everything's good with them. I don't bear any malice towards them. So it's one of those things where if you're not able to grow past that either, and you are now getting your narrow worldview based on some perspectives and experiences you have further validated by media and culture and government and authority positions, now all of a sudden it's going to be really difficult to wake you up out of that. That's why it's funny with the term woke. It's the opposite of being awake, which is what people used to say, was like you were awake. You could see through things because you were not asleep any longer. Yeah. So that even seems like a control of the language.
It's another word for like being aware. And I think it's been used for a lot of spiritual type of stuff. I wouldn't say spiritual, just like meditation and just being more aware of like what's going through your head is another word. And I think it's one of those things the left are great at branding, with the left, Black Lives Matter and like just woke and just like things that people have somehow, I don't think woke was branded necessarily, but somehow the media has curved some of our words, at least since it's been kind of recently more controlled by the left. Like they branded it almost like in a way where you can't argue against it. It almost means the opposite. It's weird. Before we jump forward, well, let me see what Admiral Wackass here said real quick. America is the least racist place in the world. Probably. It's up there. I'd say, I don't know what else would compare, but at least on the books, I think we should be, just by the laws we have.
To be honest, it's difficult to compare because so many other places are still not as diverse as America.
Right. We're like we're the petri dish of this experiment. Yeah. He's got to dip out, but thanks for having a little time with us. I surely appreciate it. On your way out, maybe spread word about the stream. We're going for a little bit longer. Before we move on, though, you've got a book. I know you've got several books, but you've got one series that you're taking a creator role, right? You're doing
This is my big 7'2", 400-pound baby.
Nice. Let me zoom in on some of this the beautiful's here. You got so many creators on the board, but this is your baby in form of how long? When's the first time you came up with the idea for King Cryptid?
Kind of in a fleeting way, I guess. 2018 in a substantially fleeting way, but this kind of subject matter. Yeah, this kind of subject matter was always in me, probably longer than my interest even in comics, but it just narrowly, because I was always into like the paranormal, the unknown, the unusual, the strange, things that just seem impossible, but yet they're possible. Yeah. So that kind of fueled my love also of comics and all the amazing supernatural things that occur within them. But King Cryptid really came about around 2018 or so. I had an idea I wanted to tell when I had the time, if I was able to. I wanted to tell a story that was an ongoing series where I could really dive into the world of creatures and monsters that live among us and are among us. And it's a very accepted kind of thing that they exist, but yet it's still not prevalent. And that's kind of a lot of like what we have in the world, where a lot of people, the more you talk to them, you're like, oh, you do believe in some kind of paranormal something. Even though, you know, you go into this and you think most people would just think you're crazy, you know, even if people don't think aliens exist, maybe they're into ghosts. If people don't think cryptids exist, maybe they're into what's also a cryptid. Maybe they're into things like a sea monster, whatever it may be. You know, there's all kinds of strange and unusual things. Maybe they think there's some kind of ancient alien hypothesis or something as far as how a lot of these ancient civilizations were around, were built, whatever. And then there's some people who, like myself, I'm kind of open to all of it. I'm fascinated by all of it. So I find that there's so many people out there that are into some kind of aspect of something that's unexplained. I think we're just curious because it's so much of this we'll never really know the answer. So that's how King Cryptid came along, was wanting to tell a series like that. And I wanted to have a centralized focus figure, which became King Cryptid, and the world around him. And who does he encounter? Who does he meet? What kind of adventures and journeys does he go on? What's the conflict? What's the core premises? All of that kind of thing. So within King Cryptid, he himself is a 500 or so year old cursed immortal. And he used to be human, but he got a curse placed upon him. He was betrayed and cursed by his own people. And now he is not aware if he could even die or whatever. He doesn't really know. He just knows he's been around for a while. He's not invincible, but he's immortal. So he still needs to take care of himself. He still needs to do various things to make sure he can continue to survive. But all the various sorts of creatures he comes across, mostly at this point in time, it takes place in the New England area. He resides in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And he kind of just surveys over the area. He, before, used to get out and about a lot. He used to, and we'll touch upon that within the series. He used to be in various regions. He used to do a couple different things, mostly along the east coast of the U.S. But we're going to hit on a couple stories in the future where he gets outside this region, and he can do so relatively easily. I haven't explained why just yet, but we're going to be branching out of New England eventually. So in the first 9 issues, because the first 4 came out last year, 5 to 9 are funding this year and are going to be out next year. And then next year's campaign will have 10 to 13, unless we can raise 50,000 on this campaign. We're close to 28K. But if we reach 50K, I'll have 5 issues next year. But next year will be 4. But we've got the first issue's got the Behemoth, which is basically the Mothman, with the genetic combination here of he was a human being, went in to get a procedure to save his life. He had a rare condition, and they merged him with the DNA of the Mothman instead of making him better. So they took advantage of the situation and created this monster out of him. He can't change back. Some of these creatures can shapeshift. Behemoth cannot change back. So he's merged with the DNA of the Mothman. Issue 2, we got the Granite Beast, and he's an ancient rock beast. He's the last of his kind. So he's kind of got a complex about him where he's feeling like, what's his purpose? Why is he even still here? Why is he left? Issue 3, we do a flashback issue. We've got a bunch of kids from 1984 going into the Lincoln, New Hampshire White Mountain National Forest looking for cryptids and aliens and all kinds of stuff on that specific night, because the specific night they're looking on is the 23rd anniversary of the first recorded in the United States anyway, alien abduction, which is the Betty and Barney Hill incident, and that occurred in September 19th, 1961. So there's all kinds of historical paranormal history references here throughout the series. But issue 4, we've got Broog the Swamp Monster. And every one of these, it's an ongoing series, self-contained episodes, issues, and then there's an overarching continuity. So things tie together, things build up, things are referenced. So that kind of stuff is important. Every issue counts, but also you won't ever be lost or feel like you read an issue and I feel like I'm in the middle of a conversation. You know, there's a lot of stories like that nowadays that like you can feel like you're in the middle of a whole story and you don't know what the hell's going on. Right. Every issue is a complete story. So that's issue
what I like
4.
About this, that you have it like serialized, but also you can pick one up and, you know, just run with it if you want.
Totally, yeah. Issue 5, we've got the White Mountain Yeti, and obviously the Yetis in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. A lot of the cryptids within King Cryptid, a lot of the things are not necessarily cryptids that people would say are real cryptids. Like, we'll have an issue with Bigfoot and things like that, and Mothman is like a real cryptid. But a lot of the ones are invented and created for the series that are maybe based on other cryptids or an amalgamation of other cryptids. So some people think that the whole series might just be a checklist for cryptids across New England or the world or whatever. Not necessarily. There's a lot of characters here that are created for various scenarios and the world of King Cryptid, which is basically our world. But yeah, so we got the White Mountain Yeti in issue 5. He goes up against him. And then issue 6, we got the dragon Vanderkin. Why is his name Vanderkin? You guys find out eventually within the course of the series. But this issue, we're introduced to the dragon. And it's a more, I think, for most people, it's going to be an emotionally hitting issue when they put the pieces together. Throughout the course of the issue, you're seeing the dragon, you're seeing him do odd things and behave kind of in an odd way. He abducts 3 people, brings them to the top of the Old Man of the Mountain, which is this guy on the right. And the Old Man of the Mountain, is an actual landmark in New Hampshire. Used to have that exact face profile, but the face fell several years ago.
Really? Wow.
So in this issue, I actually explain what happened to the face, because the face, something happens within the issue that the face does get damaged. So that's kind of my alternative history taking
like
place.
That.
But yeah, this issue it's a great one. It builds up on the characters and also ties into stuff that's happened before while also referencing things that are to come. Cool. All of this stuff is like, it's the way I loved comics when I was a kid growing up reading comics. It wasn't big decompressed stories or whatever. It was largely you could jump in at any moment in time and go, wow, that's a fun story. I want to know if they got any more of these guys, and you go to the comic shop or the newsstand or convenience store. I mean, comics were everywhere at that point, and you could just pick up whatever issue just looked interesting and count that you were going to get a good story. So I'm aiming for the same thing with King Cryptid as well.
Moment to moment, it's fun.
Yeah. Where these are like day or days in the life, and then we go to the next one. So they all connect, but they are still, there's a sense of their isolated moments that build up. And will you see some of these characters again? Will you not? It depends how the story plays out. And then it also depends on me listening to the readers if they like certain characters. And I pay attention to that, and I'll bring them back, and I'll find a way to do so.
Cool.
So that's the fun, interactive part. I like that part about it.
For sure.
But yeah, so King Cryptid number 7, we've got a werewolf couple here, Wendy and William. It starts off in 1821 in Dogtown Village in Massachusetts, which was a real place, really called that too. Mostly because of the fact that there was a lot of women that lived there and they had dogs to protect them and be companions, because their husbands were generally fishermen or they were a part of the Navy and various things, so they were out at sea a lot of the time. Eventually, though, Dogtown Village, the history of it goes to complete crap because of the fact that it's a coastal town. It's not really a great place for farming. It's on the South Shore, so it's not really getting a lot of the sediments that would be great for farming, which would happen on the North Shore because of the way the glacier kind of moved through and deposited certain elements and minerals. So that whole town just dries up, turns into relatively nothingness. But in the course of it, where we're bringing in some of that history where, and even in real history, they thought there was a lot of witchcraft that was being done, which was the cause and the blame of why they couldn't farm, why things were going bad, all that kind of stuff. So we kind of bring in some of that element with this, where these two are fleeing because they're Eastern European immigrants, and they're being blamed for the recent bout of a famine. So they're being chased out because they're strange and unusual immigrants, and they're new to here. But the twist is that William is trying to be courted by a witch named Tamira, and Tamira he's in love with Wendy, and Tamira's trying to get William. William is just pushing her advances. He doesn't want anything to do with her, so she places a curse on the two of them, and the curse basically involves them being werewolves, but when one is human, the other is a wolf, and when one is a wolf, the other is human. So they are immortal, they're werewolves, but they can never actually be together as humans and enjoy their life together, but yet they're always together. So together forever, but forever apart.
Dude, that's very cool. Yeah.
So when we go into the future, we see that there's a werewolf that's been terrorizing the local town of Jackson, New Hampshire, and a task force is sent in to take care of the problem. And we find out there's a lot more to it than we had thought. So we see these characters again down the line, but yeah, we establish a lot of that right now and tell the specific moment in time of what occurs.
Yeah, if you're listening, guys, this seems like a great time to jump in. I think this series is going to go far. So not that I'm trying to shill for you. It just sounds that way. So, but yeah, I like how each has its own. Like, man, it's got. Man, the feelings, just the vibe of all this is very nostalgic, I guess, for me, because I remember times when we had media like this. But
thank you, man. Yeah,
this is great.
Yeah, and that's the whole series for me, is basically doing that and getting back to basics with storytelling and characterization and world building and character building, and also making sure you're telling a complete story. Like, someone buys an issue, like, that's the thing that's great about King Cryptid. If you're not into cryptids, let's say you see a cover and you're like, oh, I'm not really into this, the White Mountain Yeti. I'm not really into Yetis or cryptids. But that werewolf one looks cool. Or this one with an alien abduction one looks cool. You could pick it up and read just that one. And maybe you want to get the others because you enjoyed the one you currently had. But you could still go in there. It's kind of like back in the day if you saw certain characters as guest stars on a series, or they were going to fight a certain villain, and you're like, oh, that one's going to be good. So you picked up that specific issue, but maybe the next issue, maybe it wasn't your thing. Maybe it didn't look as good to you, whatever that may be. I'm trying to get back to that. Every one of these I'm trying to make a winner, though, of course. There's no filler here. But I'm fine with people being like, oh, I'm into this, I'm into that. I'll pick that issue up. And if I like that one, that'll be my number one.
That's a great, like it becomes your personal number one.
Yeah.
I like that idea. You mentioned before that you have got some special on this Indiegogo, right?
Yeah, specifically on the Indiegogo only because of the way the shipping works. I can't do this on the Alterna site, so it's just a New Moon special this time for November, just on Indiegogo. It's a 2 tote bag set for $5. If you're in the U.S., shipping is free. If you're outside the U.S., shipping's $15. The reason I can't put this on the Alterna site is because the Alterna site does not do itemized shipping. It does universal site shipping. And the universal site shipping means it'd be $6 for shipping in the U.S. and then $25 Canada, $40 international. So Indiegogo has the edge when it comes to being able to itemize ship as far as against our site. That's the only edge it really does have. But if you do want the tote bag set, these are big, perfect tote bags. If you go to conventions, if you grocery shop, whatever it may be, you can fit a lot in these, 13 by 15 by 10. So you got one tote bag here on the left is the New England Cryptid Research Organization, which is the shadowy government organization. It's a cover-up of a cover-up of a cover-up. There's so many levels to what the New England Cryptid Research Organization is, and we get to that throughout the course of the series. So this tote bag basically looks like you visited their gift shop and walked out of the place with that. And then there's a King Cryptid tote bag as well. So you can get that as well. And then both of them are in there. You get both for the $5.
Dude, that's awesome. You never can have enough tote bags. Everybody knows that. But yeah, it's cool that you have so many options when you do your crowdfunds. I like that you're crowdfunding for the year, and it's definitely different than what you see from the normal, crowdfund, because you're normally the creators are trying to put out one graphic novel or like a half issue, or what I mean. They're trying to jumpstart their series. Where it's almost like a pre-order setup for you, which is very cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a mix between that, because you obviously want to fund for the creation of them as well. But it's awesome that you're doing this. Do you have any other? Because I have more questions. Do we have a few more minutes to
sure. Yeah.
Throw some questions at you? Awesome. I generally have more questions than we have time for, which it just feels better that way, because then I just have this idea of like, okay, I can always have him back on and we'll dive right in.
Absolutely.
But I feel like with you, it's never ending. I feel like I feel like we've gone 20 minutes on each question, and there's way more than enough.
All right, I'll try to get to as many as I can if you want me to shorten up some of the answers.
No worries. I like the long form stuff. I'd rather have you on the channel one more time, or whatever, in the future. But I'm trying to find the most interesting things. The things that I like to ask are some of these they're just less deep questions. Like for you specifically, I think who's your favorite artist? I think this is something that we never hear from you.
My favorite artist, man. If I had to look at my comic collection, I would have to say it's John Byrne. Like if it's just, you count them all up, and who do I have the most of? So obviously I'm drawn to his art.
That's what I do with video games. Like I figure out how my favorite video game by just hours put in.
Yeah, I'm like, it must be that. Even though for the longest time I didn't put him in my top 3, I would say generally I would say probably Art Adams, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, especially around the 80s, and then probably Jim Lee at late 80s, early 90s. But looking clearly at my collection, John Byrne blows him out of the water.
Yeah, and I think looking at some of your art too, you definitely get the Jim Lee, John Byrne thing go together. I get that. Art Adams, I do as well. It's a little more, I know, his flair is a little bit more exaggerated, I think, right?
Yeah, especially now. I love a lot of early Art Adams. Man, that stuff was great. But yeah, it's definitely it's gonna have to end up being John Byrne, and then after that, I guess the Buscema brothers. I love both of them a lot. Always loved McFarlane's work. There's so many. It's like I could just name like 30 artists that I really love. It's so difficult to dwindle it down to one. But if I did have to look at my collection and then quantify it, it would be John Byrne.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like you have given that answer, but in different ways. Like that answer is usually snuck into a less direct question where I wanted to like specifically get you on it. Pin you down. I want to pin you down. Put you down on a list over here. You're on the Byrne list. So let's see. What's the most interesting thing I can get you? What's your least favorite thing to draw? How about that?
My least favorite thing to draw would probably be anything mechanical and inorganic.
Okay.
So buildings drive me nuts. Cars drive me nuts. Anything that I can't kind of, get a little bit funky with the line work. They're fun to draw, but at the same time, I always draw it and I'm like, it looks a little wonky. That wheel on that car is just gonna.
Dude, it's like this delicate balance, I think, with hard surface stuff. Like you want it to feel hard, but if you go just straight rulers and straight, then
it
lines,
loses any kind of life to it. And
it's a. I think the guys that really do it well don't get enough cred because it's harder than it seems. In a lot of ways, if you focus on drawing characters all the time, you can get good at them because drawing the figure is tough. But at the same time, you can know the guys that are drawing figures all the time and not backgrounds. It's because the backgrounds either are a little too stiff or they just rather focus on the figure. But generally, my favorite thing is to look at people's art and see what they don't draw, and that's how I kind of tell what they don't like to draw or what they're not really confident in. Because it's just a rule of thumb. Like I only know it because of my own work. That's how I figure out what I need to practice. It's like, if I don't see a lot of feet, it means I probably am not wanting to draw feet because I suck. So interesting to ask.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think there's other smaller questions, but I think the bigger question that I have here is, what do you think about the new thing that DC's doing to try to replicate the smaller size of books, trying to push a new line of smaller manga-ish sized books for cheaper? What do you think about like a smaller?
That's interesting. I didn't hear about that.
Yeah. I guess I think they're taking it from like a manga approach because they're able to sell for a little bit cheaper, and I think the kids are just more used to it now. Like, I think that would sell books just on its own. That like the books resemble manga books.
So are they reprinting stories
I think they are, but I know they're moving forward, but I think they are doing a few series. Maybe someone could correct me in the comments or down the road. But I saw one article and someone comment on it, and I'm pretty sure I saw a new IP and I saw like a reprinting, but just in like a whatever it is. I don't know what size they use, 6 by something,
Well, I mean, form factor is a thing. So what I mean by that is that people like things to be uniformly a certain size. So maybe that will work. That's interesting. I really wonder. I'll have to look into it further. I think if they were to have, because it's all about the content after the form, and if the content doesn't speak to the kids, like let's say if it's all a bunch of Silver Age Batman that gets reprinted, some people might really like that, but then other people, if they're trying to get the kids, might go, "What the hell is this?"
It's not going to fly.
Yeah.
I do agree. And a lot of it, I think if you tried to reprint certain stories, especially the old stuff, like it wouldn't look good at that size. It'd be too scaled down.
Yeah. What I'm curious about with them, if they're going to do that approach, they could always maybe just even reuse some of their really great stories that they've had over the years, and maybe even hire like a manga type artist and get in there and adapt it to that, and maybe that would work. And then you don't have to necessarily, you just need an editor to get in there and boil it down to be the most effective form of storytelling, but still have that story credit to the person who made it to begin with. And almost like the way they would adapt comic stories for film or for TV, adapt these stories for that different kind of artist in that different kind of format. I think there's a way to make that viable, perhaps. But I think
like
that's a good move for them to start. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, because I think, people are not going physically to bookstores as much anyway. But like when you do go to a bookshelf and you see the difference, like it's very clear. And I think like it's one of those zeitgeist things for young people that like manga somehow has become cool. And just you being in the old school like American comics section is weird, or I feel like young people being in that section I rarely see. It's always
that section's it's a mess too, because the form factor's all over the place among the publishers,
right?
And then you go to the manga section and it's like this beautiful looking organized thing, it's weird. It's the same feeling that when I go to like the long boxes with all the back issues, if they were all crazy all over the place, all kinds of sizes, too tall, too fat, whatever it may be, they don't fit in the box, they're too small. That would be a really weird experience going in there. And then if you're doing that among product lines or within the issue line and it's all over the place, not even like a little change here or there, but like, one of them's 8.5 by 11, and the other one's 6 by 9, and the other one's 5 by 7, and the other one's standard. It'd be insane.
It's such a big contrast that it's almost like you go to the manga section and you're like in the Apple store now, because everything's clean lines and like the American size, just like the mom and pop. And
while I love that, they haven't figured out a way to organize it within those stores that makes it seem fine. They don't even organize most of those things by publisher, let alone genre or anything. It's just kind of like graphic novels.
Yeah, but it's so weird. It's weird how in 20 years it's totally flipped on its head. That's not how I remember it. Especially just manga in general. It was unheard of for like if you mentioned you were reading manga in like 20 years ago, you would get probably laughed at or made fun of. Not necessarily by like in general, but like someone would poke fun at that because it's like obscure. But now it's like the main thing. It's weird how it's the main thing over here.
Yeah.
For kids, at least, like a lot of us, we still really love our side of things. But
and I still think if they don't keep them accessible in terms of the stories, and they don't keep them at the same level of excitement or storytelling pacing that they're used to, then it's all for nothing.
True, and what you said about genre too, like you can find just about anything in that other manga section, and I feel like 70% of our American comics are just superhero pushed stuff that it doesn't need to be. You can totally fill those shelves with more genres.
Oh yeah,
it's pretty interesting, but I think we're pretty much out of time. I wanted to keep going, but definitely don't want to hold you. I want to hold to my word of time, and I want to just save that for later. However, before we go, I really want to thank you for everything you've done in like just the sphere of comics, like inspiring people. Like for me, it's always, I've realized who's inspired me in retrospect. It's one of those things where like, just like your favorite artist, you're like, oh, in retrospect, I have a lot of his books. But in retrospect, I think I've done bolder moves with like creating because of you, and I want to thank you.
Oh, it's great to hear. Thank you, man.
And
I'm glad.
I think that's a sentiment a lot of people have. And yeah, really appreciate it. I do want to let me bring up my book before we go, because if I never do this, then like no one ever sees my book. But very quickly, I've got a new website, guys, and it's the same as before, just redesigned. So same things, starcircuitcomic.com, and oh man, it ruined my it flipped me. My screen share flipped all of a sudden for some reason.
Wow, I didn't know it could do that.
Yeah, it reorganized pretty much right as I clicked. It's all good. So starcircuitcomic.com is very redesigned. The old one was a little bit more straightforward and like a scrolly thing, and now I think it's even more organized, where at the top you have everything you possibly want, including a free preview of chapter 1. And I think the biggest driver for a lot of you guys that have new books. Put this on your website, dude. Like, you don't have to, but I think it's super a great way for people to like really, I don't know, invest without investing. You know what I mean? And that's what most people want. I think if you go to conventions, I don't know if you've experienced this, Pete, but like when you go to conventions, sometimes people expect you to have like the free thing. Like somebody asked me like, where do I get the free PDF? Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean the free PDF? And
I did a convention when someone came up to the table and just points to everything and goes, these are all free? And they all have prices there. I'm like, no, these are for sale. And then like, this is for free. And it'd be like a pin or a sticker or something. This was like years ago. But yeah, I know what you mean.
It's weird. And some of that's ignorance, but some of it is knowledge to like, it's an insight into today's world of books and like the internet. Just like most kids try to find things for free. And so if you do the thing where like what I'm doing, giving 10 pages for free, they won't try to go search for the PDF that's, illegal. You know what I mean? And so giving a little bit of that helps. I also have character bios and story stuff. But the main thing is the shop. I got it for cheap right now. Might even be running out very soon. So this is the last time you're going to be able to get this. You'll be able to get chapter 1 in a different cover, generically a new cover, when we do the new chapter 2 launch, which is coming in the new year. But you can get that variant cover from Kanan White and Steve Herkow's color now, and it'll be the last time you'll be able to get it. Please go check out Star Circuit 2. It's on Indiegogo if you search it there. There's links on the website as well, but if you want to just get notifications for the email, it's on the homepage here. Sign up for Chapter 2 news. That's pretty much it for Star Circuit. I'm working diligently. I'm very close to like taking a hiatus on my day job just to bang out tons of stuff and get back on schedule, because life happens and I'm behind schedule.
Hey, if you could do it, go for it.
I know. That's one of those things where like you don't tell the kids enough. You should probably like focus on money, because money is the key to the freedom. The freedom is money. Money is freedom for doing your creative efforts. It's not always that way, but it allows you to do a lot of things that you normally wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, that's why it's disturbing to me when I deal with some creators that are like, I don't really care about the money, just the fact that it's being made. I'm like, well, you need to go elsewhere then.
Yeah. Because
you got to care about that, because otherwise it's not going to continue to get made, because it takes money to get it made. Even if you're like, I do everything though on it. I'm fine. I don't need to get a page rate. I don't need anything. I do it as a labor of love. I'm like, yeah, but the printer don't. Yeah. The shipping company doesn't. They don't do those things as a labor of love. They need a lot of money, so you want to try to sell these books. And even if you don't go out and say it's about selling and making money, you want as many people as possible to read what you're creating, don't you? Otherwise, again, don't put it out there. Just kind of do it for yourself, and then maybe just put it for free and then call it a day. But yeah, there's a weird mindset sometimes among a lot of creators that are like, just to make it is good enough. That's mission accomplished. And mission accomplished for me is when every possible human being on the earth has read my comic. And since new ones are getting born every day, that mission is never going to be over. Right. Yeah, it's it's the journey of journeys. Exactly. The meta journey. To me, the cool thing about
making stuff is that like the whole cool part of it is you could literally not show anybody and you'd still have fun. And that's how you know you're doing the right thing, because you're enjoying it. But that's not really, there's always like a dichotomy between a lot of things. To continue doing it, you generally need money. And to do it the most often, you need to have it be your source of money, unless you're some sort of rich person. But they have to mingle a little bit. Shadow Punk is here and says, I missed the whole thing because I suck. No, you didn't suck, because this thing's being uploaded. You can watch it anytime you want.
Catch the replay.
That's correct. But that's it, guys. I had a blast. I hope you had a blast, Pete.
Oh, yeah. It's always great talking to you, man. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, for sure. This channel is growing really quickly, guys. So like and just watch some of my videos. I've got a bunch of art tutorials, a bunch of talks about breakdowns of art. I started one series called Comic Artist Breakdowns, where I break down people's art styles. And people have been asking for a new one for a long time, and I'm finally going to get around to doing the next one. So it's fun. I actually broke down Jim Lee's art style last time as best I could, and so it's an interesting one. Hope to do the next one soon. Thanks for showing everybody. Yep, good show. Thank you for showing up.
Thanks,
and
appreciate
Pete,
it.
Best of luck with the crowdfund at Alterna.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. And everybody, go check out alternacomics.com/winter. We've got a winter apparel and merch campaign going on right now. Nice premium blankets and hoodies, really good stuff. A new beanie, a new mug. Stay warm this winter. They're going to be shipping out in December and January, so you'll actually have them to use in the winter time. And then other than that, go subscribe to me on YouTube. It's just youtube.com/Peter Simeti, and we have Comic Book Radio even tonight. I'm going to have Frankie Paul on, the comic who loves comics. We're going to be talking about our love of comics, so it's going to be a fun show. 9 o'clock
That does sound
Eastern.
like a good topic.
Yeah.
And guys, those links, I do have Alterna Comics and your channel on there. I don't have the Indiegogo, but you'll find a lot of links on your website too. But they're in the description for anybody watching this later. Go check it out. And yeah, thanks for joining us. This has been Good Company with Good Joe and Pete Simeti. Have a good day and a wonderful rest of your weekend, because, we all got to get back to work sometime, but enjoy your time off. All right, everybody.
Thanks,
So long.
guys.